Oh, hello there. Still not quite getting the marks you deserve for OCR Section A, Paper 1, Questions 1 to 4. And you've watched my individual videos exploring Questions 2, 3 and 4. I sort you out. Schofield on Shakespeare.
In this video, I will reference the November 2018 Paper 1 past paper. I'd recommend downloading this as a PDF from the OCR website, although I will also show the questions and extracts on screen. Why not do this now? It will probably be most useful for you to complete the questions yourself so that you can compare your own responses to those in the video. If you would like to do this, press pause now. The extracts and then the questions will appear in 5-second intervals.
Time now to take you through some responses written by past pupils for each of these questions. What do these do well? And most crucially of all, what do they need to do better?
Here are 3 responses to 1A. What do you think? Discuss. It's pause time. Let's take each one in turn. Well, as the mark scheme indicates, the pupil has identified the correct 2 words. However, note the question. It says give 2 words. So why has this pupil wasted time explaining what it is the girls do not like about their jobs? There's no need to do this, and it will waste precious time within a time-pressured exam. I still think the pupil will get the full 2 marks though. This wasn't the only response within the set to list these 2 words. However, can you see the problem? The question asks for us to look again at lines 6 to 10. These words are from lines 14 to 18. Whoops! So important to read these questions incredibly carefully before putting pen to paper. This response was, of course, correct. Happy days. Time now for 1B. Read through the responses. Which one or ones get the mark? First response. Now, no marks will be lost for this. Spelling isn't assessed in this question. But how should this word be spelt? And of course, I was referring to the word repercussions. Now, the answer itself, does it really directly answer the question? And the answer is no, not really. The question wants one reason why no one knows that they are unhappy. And the reason for this is that they don't speak up. Now, if the question was why do they not speak up, then the answer might well be the one shown here. No marks here, I'm afraid. This response is clearly the same one within the 3rd bullet point of the mark scheme. But does quite so much need to be written for just a paltry single mark? This final response is absolutely fine, but if you were quibbling, does it give 1 reason or 2? One C time. What do you think? This answer is absolutely fine. What about this one? Well, there is no explicit evidence that the enjoyment comes from their bosses, I'm afraid, which means no points. Finally, this response is correct and illustrates the fact that you don't need to, indeed you shouldn't, write much when there's only 1 mark available. Now on to question 2, which asks for similarities, not differences, between the experiences of work within the 2 texts. Here's what an OCR examiner wrote about responses to this question. So, 3 similarities may or may not be the magic number. However, it isn't just about similarities between the texts, but similarities between the experiences of work as shown within the texts. The top band of the mark scheme wants a detailed response with perceptive understanding of the similarities across the 2 texts, backed up by short, embedded quotations. How did some of my past pupils get on? Read this through and discuss. What kind of a mark would it get? It starts well, doesn't it? Clear similarity between the texts with a nicely detailed point. However, there's no need to go into detail to explain the effect of the word exist. Instead, immediately switch to the other text to explain the similarity. Notice also how, within the second paragraph, the initial point is a bit woolly and there's no evidence provided from text 1 to back it up. We just have the rather wishy-washy. This explains why the letter is written so formally and careful not to offend. I would give this response 3 out of 6. Here's another response. What do you think? This is what is required. Yes, perhaps one similarity is a little vague. Both jobs aren't very pleasant, but there are sufficient other perceptive similarities, notably the idea that both jobs take a physical toll on the worker and that there is a lack of intellectual stimulation, backed up by appropriate evidence, to give this full marks. Let's have a look at some suggested similarities taken from the mark scheme. Note that examiners are instructed to be open-minded, and many other valid similarities were identified by candidates and rewarded by examiners during the marking of this question. Press pause to read these through. Time now for question 3. I've talked in previous videos about the importance of getting the balance right in terms of exploring both language and structure. In the examiner's report, they give some indications of what kinds of structural features might be referred to with this question: alliteration, antithesis, repetition, listing, and the use of contrasting foci within paragraphs. The mark scheme looks for a sophisticated appreciation of the effects of language and structure. Short embedded quotations and subject terminology need to be employed. Here's what a past pupil wrote. Read it through. What do you think? This is in 2 parts. Each part will appear in 5-second intervals. Press pause now. So we have some subject terminology used in the opening sentence. However, does this feel a little like feature spotting, just delightedly name-dropping a fancy-sounding literary term rather than exploring language in depth? I would probably prefer an opening topic sentence which actually stated what one of the disadvantages actually were. For example, one disadvantage of the job is that workers have to deal with rude customers hell-bent on complaining about trivial things. However, there is some good insight shown into the language, but I worry that 162 words have been expanded essentially just exploring one quotation. Additionally, is it even true that asyndeton has been used? Within this section, I like the detailed, very specific topic sentence at the top of the slide, sharply focusing on a disadvantage of the job. However, could the phrase pile on the pounds be explored in more detail? I also like the focus on structure when talking about the contrast between different paragraphs. My mark? Here's another pupil response. What do you make of it? What kind of mark would it get? Pause time. A few thoughts. Firstly, that initial sentence is slightly puzzling. The meaning needs to be clearer. Might he mean something like this? But there's plenty to like here. The language of the phrase let off some steam is explored in plenty of detail. There are loads of embedded quotations showing a broad, detailed understanding of the passage as a whole. And the second paragraph focuses on structure by pointing out the contrasting content of different paragraphs. Within this section, subject terminology is used consistently accurately, including referencing sentence types. I wasn't totally convinced by the description of let's face it as a simple sentence. Actually, it is a main clause, as it is followed by a colon. Nonetheless, there is some very good analysis on this page. I particularly liked the analysis of the verb find and the annoyingly pedantic behaviour of the customers. Overall, I would give this 11 out of 12. Although the examiners will be marking via the grids, they will have previously looked at the kind of points a candidate might make, the indicative content. Press pause to read these through now. Time now for question 4, dear chums. What does the mark scheme want? Remember that it's split into 2 sections, up to 12 marks for how well you probe, how well you weigh up the question in relation to the 2 texts, with your argument supported by deliciously embedded quotations, and up to 6 marks for the regularity and pertinence of your comparisons. This question is about your independent judgments on the statement, your ability to think for yourself and create your argument. Here's what one of my past pupils wrote. Press pause to read it through and discuss. There are 3 parts about to appear at 5-second intervals. Thoughts. It's certainly clear that this is an advanced English pupil with a broad range of vocabulary at his fingertips. Words such as grueling, unrelenting and deterioration may not be used by your average grade 7 or lower pupil. However, this is not what this question is about. This question is about interwoven comparisons, an independent argument, weighing up the question in engaging detail. And there are signs of meeting this criteria here. I particularly liked the Bracketed interwoven comparison towards the end of the second paragraph. The response continues with a close focus on the question, with some very specific points about why text 1 gives a vivid description of a challenging and an unpleasant job. It is all-consuming, overwhelming, that there isn't even time for something as simple as reading. A nice contrast is made with the fact that the fast food workers can take part in group games. But could this have been evaluated even more explicitly? Something like, this response is of course good, but I wonder whether the pupil may have rushed slightly towards the end. My preference once again would be for the evaluation to be extended. Something like, I gave this piece 10 out of 12 and 5 out of 6. Here's another response from a past pupil. Read it through now and discuss. Some thoughts. The introduction is concise and sharply focused. But what has happened with the phrase worker's salary? Where is the apostrophe? Good Lord, does this pupil need to watch this video as a matter of urgency? Within the first main paragraph, we have a sharp focus on the question and the difference in payments between the two jobs and the effect of this. I think what impresses within this large paragraph is the scope of the response, which really shows a very detailed understanding of the text and the question. The pupil contrasts the life lessons learnt by work in text 2 to the fact that the work in text 1 has become numbed. The pupil also contrasts the fact that there are fun outings in text 2 for the workers with the lack of connection between workers and bosses stressed in text 1. There are also interwoven comparisons throughout, as illustrated by these highlighted phrases. In the final paragraph of the essay, I like the more sophisticated evaluation and the idea that, in a way, the disadvantage of the job in text 2 could actually be seen as benefits. However, there is no oversimplification. He concludes by pointing out that nonetheless, the work in text 2 can still include challenging and unpleasant moments, such as being sworn at. I would give this response full marks. As with other questions, the examiners will be marking via a grid. However, before starting the marking, they will have previously looked at the kind of points a candidate might make. Press pause to read these through now. So, some final tips. Yes, the question 1 questions are fairly easy, but don't lose crucial marks. Read the questions incredibly carefully. Make sure that you're referring to the right section, and please, no need for full sentences. The question doesn't state how many similarities you need. I would suggest 3 to 4 similarities, but make sure they're not just generic similarities, that you're actually answering the question, and of course you need to back up each point with a quotation from the text. Quotation choice is important for question 3, isn't it? So be careful. Don't just choose the easy ones in which there isn't going to be much to say. Hone in on the more complex quotations, and I'd recommend starting with a language point rather than a structure point. Typically pupils can write in more detail when exploring about language. Remember, you get penalised if you don't have a decent balance between analysis of language and analysis of structure. And question 4, 18 marks, double that for question 3 and treble that for question 2. So make sure you leave sufficient time. You need those interwoven comparisons, and with the statement, you never want to fully agree or disagree. It can be to some extent agreeing, to some extent disagreeing. You need those short quotations. And remember, AO2 is not assessed, so don't analyse language unless it results in more sophisticated evaluation. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, helping you get higher marks for Paper 1, Section A of GCSE English Language, Paper 1. I hope it's been useful. Many thanks for watching.